Welcome to the Creepin' It Real Show, your one-stop shop for weird news, movie reviews, otherworldly, and paranormal shenanigans. We'll take a dive into what's going on in creepy pop culture. You can follow Creepin' It Real Show on Twitter at creepin_it. You can email us at creepinitrealshow@gmail.com. And you can also go to our website, creepinitshow.com. Welcome to Creepin' It Real. I'm one of your hosts, Yardley, from Atlanta, Georgia. You know, there's a lot of things going on in Atlanta, like Dragon Con, so it's pretty messy downtown between that and a lot of athletic events. So I'm very happy to be podcasting instead of in all that traffic. And talking about traffic, how are things going up your way, Christy?
Ooh, glad I don't work downtown anymore. That used to be a clusterfuck. I remember those weekends, like even the Fridays leading up to those events were crazy, but it was great eye candy, I can tell you that. I am also happy to be here, having a wonderful morning and excited to talk about more Stephen King.
Yeah, you know what? We've been on a little Stephen King streak here, and from the great state of California. How you doing, Moni?
I'm good. I was kind of laughing because when you said, speaking of traffic, I thought you were going to throw it to me, and I was like, oh, I see. Southern California, synonymous with traffic, which is absolutely true. But it's like, not flattering, sir. Everything is good. I have a family friend coming over to meet my, quote, baby, who's now 2. She's never seen her before because time goes by so fast. So I think it's going to be a fun day, and I'm looking forward to having the 3-day weekend. We have tomorrow off for, what is it this time? Labor Day?
Yeah.
I should really know, right? That's kind of bad. But anyways, I'm excited to have more time off. I've been sleeping like a lot, which is something that I don't do well usually. So I'm awake and I'm ready to do this thing.
Okay, well, you know, it looks like everybody is at least on stable ground. I have a long weekend as well, so I look forward to not doing anything on Labor Day either. Well, you know what? Let's go ahead and dive into weird news. And, you know, today we're going to do a review of Creepshow. So my weird news is actually an extension of the anthology movie that we're going to discuss a little bit later. So Creepshow is coming to AMC Network streaming service. It's called Shudder. I had actually not heard about this. Had you heard about Shudder before I had put this article in there, Chris?
I've heard about Shudder, and I've been considering whether I wanted to try it or not. I'm not sure if I want to spend another separate, streaming service if they're adding this.
I'm intrigued. I've heard a lot. I mean, I've been seeing some advertisements. I looked into it about a year ago, and I actually did a poll on our Twitter page asking people, out of all these channels, horror channels and everything, what was their favorite? And I believe they picked Shudder. So, and then I kind of forgot about it. So now you talk about this again. And then I did see something, I can't remember, it was like a month ago, they were advertising Shudder on cable TV. And I was like, that's right, I need to look into that again. So I keep getting these signs. I just need to suck it up and finally do it.
You know what? I'm hard pressed to subscribe to another streaming service, but this premium service, they pretty much gave the green light to a Creepshow TV series. You know, it's based off of the iconic anthology Creepshow, which was, of course, written by Stephen King and directed by George Romero. It's slated to kind of premiere in 2019. It doesn't give specifics if it's going to be the first quarter or, you know, later on in the year. But Greg Nicotero of Walking Dead fame is attached to direct, executive produce, and oversee the show's creative elements, which pretty much says that he owns this. If it sucks, he owns it. If it's great, he owns it. But, you know, when you've built up a reputation based off of The Walking Dead, The Walking Dead has had a lot of popularity over the years. So I think that for AMC to kind of keep him in the family, so to speak, and to take a chance on this franchise, I think it's pretty good. So for me as a Creepshow fan, I'm interested in the series, but I don't think I'm interested enough to shell out any more ducats.
Yeah, I'm there. I'm waiting to see what else Shudder adds before, deciding if I want to get them. On the other hand, if they're around the same price as Hulu, I would definitely tank my Hulu, so there, because it never works.
Yeah. We're getting ready to...
I mean, if anybody has the chops, he's got the chops as far as like, we'll talk about it as we talk about the original Creepshow, but as far as making things look good, I don't feel like some of the effects necessarily held up from the old films, so that would be kind of fun. And, the short stories, you guys know me as far as I don't invest in something unless I feel like it's super excellent in the story. And so I kind of like that it'll be just a little taste of scary stories, not one long overarching theme,
But here's the thing. If they're doing a Creepshow series, one of the things that made Creepshow such a cult classic is the fact that there is, over the topness that makes you kind of laugh at it as well. So I don't think that they should go the route of, losing sight of, that part of Creepshow, because I know. Because we've discussed this before. The Walking Dead, they try really hard to be serious, and sometimes it doesn't. But if they keep it, if they have the right amount of cheese and a lot of practical effects like we saw in the original Creepshow, I think that Greg Nicotero is totally up for the task of at least doing that aspect of it. So, you know what? We'll see what's going on with that. So
we're getting ready. We're getting ready to shut off all our cable, because we have satellite right now. We had cable, shut that off. Got satellite, hate it. So once this is out, we're just going to shut down all our cable and use like Fire Stick, Apple TV.
Yep.
So I'm willing to shell out, a couple of bucks a month for something like this that I can get round the clock horror, so because we won't be paying the hundreds of dollars a month on cable. So I'm looking for stuff like this to house in our Apple TV and our Amazon Fire Stick or whatever you want to call those things now. I know they think they changed the name, but so that I can just turn it on, and everything that we've tried to watch, because I've been doing experiments, I have either found on Apple TV, Netflix, or Amazon through apps. So I have so far haven't needed to, look outside of that or even look on our satellite stuff. So that's positive moving forward, knowing that I'm not going to have a hard time finding what I need based with, what we've got without the satellite, which sucks. So anyway.
Cord cutters unite. You get Shudder and guinea pig it for us, and we'll decide.
Exactly. That seems like a plan. Now let's move into our next weird news story. Moni, tell us about the world's first sex robot movie that's hitting the screens, and stars are saying it's the next big thing.
Well, I'm laughing because this news comes from the Scottish Sun. So obviously it's written for a different audience. It's very tongue-in-cheek, but it did happen, the debut of sex robots in adult entertainment. So studio producers, Private, have collaborated with a babe-bot brothel company called Lumi Dolls to film a 28-minute movie. So it's not it's basically a short, but they do show a still photo of a man and a woman sitting next to, on either side of a Lumi doll who has her clothes off and her crotch blurred out. But adult performers Sophia Curley and Dorian Del Isla star in a film which is about how a man is caught by his girlfriend bonking a robot in a Barcelona bordello. Like, seriously, the way this is written, it just kills me. Bonking. Go ahead. Patrick Garcia, head of development at Private, said, "It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it was fun to do. The cast had a blast." It's all rhyming. Sophia Curley said, "Working with a doll was like seeing the future. This is going to be the next big thing." And she is. She's got some big things looking at this doll in this video. As reported, Lumi Dolls, which operates robot knocking shops in Barcelona and in Moscow, is now opening a bot bonking branch in the Italian city of Turin. Lumi Dolls co-founder and owner Sergio Prieto said the firm signed an agreement with investors to bring the body bots to Italy to capitalize on the big market that's going to explode. You have to be a porn person to just speak in just puns, a big market that's going to explode. So
yeah,
yes, I'm curious if we have any listeners who happen to work in, adult film industry, how this affects that. Are there actors and actresses out there who are afraid they're going to be replaced eventually? I noticed none of these are male. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I was getting ready to say, I mean, I always hear the fear about robots and machines taking jobs, but I never parlayed that into the porn industry. So interesting concept. I'm not sure. I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna lie and say I don't watch porn. I do every once in a while. It's a good time, change things up. But I don't know about sex doll porn. We'd have to.
I don't think that people have to really worry about them replacing them.
Yeah.
Well, the company, private, that did the collaboration, they're kind of like a high end. Like they're the ones who still try to shoot movies, like
try
for
to make
porn.
their plot.
Yeah, they shoot stuff like that, so they can probably afford to rent these out. But you have to think that most of the porn that's out now is just, hey, what's your name? Start banging.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not like her acting could be any worse than what you see.
Yeah, so they got the money to do it, but I don't think that workers in the adult entertainment industry have anything to worry about until the robots actually start doing something.
Yeah.
I just don't. And even then, the cost is probably too high. So,
and then it's food.
Yeah, so I think they'll be okay. Now, Christy, what do you got? Tell us about this man claiming to be a baby boy who was kidnapped.
Yeah, I don't know how to follow robot porn, but I'll do my best.
Bring up the rear, Christy. Bring up the rear.
Got you. I got you, girl. So this is a little for the little true crime fanatics like me. This guy is claiming to be the baby boy in Colorado City that was kidnapped from his crib 32 years ago. Police have played down his claims as his family anxiously await the DNA results. This little boy, Christopher Abeta, is 7-month-old baby who went missing 30 years ago. 32, they said at the top. I don't know. Anyway, and a man has come forward who thinks he may be him. They don't say why he thinks he's the baby that went missing. But the sad part that as you read the story is this is the 4th time they've run DNA results in the since DNA became available. So it's hard to really, get your hopes up too much, but there's been even more that have come forward. I guess stuff like this, a lot of weirdos come forward. He's the 4th one that's actually got a DNA test though. So the Colorado Bureau of Investigation says it could take some time to come back with the man's DNA results to put an end to speculation. The baby's sister, Denise Alves, admits the image was good enough to make someone take a second look at it. Colorado Springs law enforcement aren't as convinced, according to the Colorado Springs Gazette. They're still investigating the claim, and they think it'll have a negative ending. But, I mean, they did like a sketch of what the baby would look like now, and he looks a lot like the sketch of what the baby would look like at this age. So that kind of blew me away. So, I don't know. I think they said it'll take a month. So stay tuned, and we'll see if he's the missing baby. I can't even imagine being this family. I mean...
No, I know. Either way, honestly.
Oh, it's awful. It's absolutely awful, but I can't even begin to go through, going through this so many times, hoping that you finally found the baby. But if it is him, I'll be anxious to hear his story on why he thought he was this baby.
Yeah, or if he's fucking with his family, may he rot in hell. But if not, this is super interesting either way. We should try to follow up, maybe.
Yeah, that'll be good to to follow up on. Now, I didn't see anything, but were the police saying that they had reasons to be suspicious that this is the kid based off of what, though? Like, is this family rich? Did they think that, he's trying to, shoehorn himself into some money or something, or is it just why would they?
There's just I don't know if it's because he's not telling the backstory of growing up. He's being very private about it. he probably doesn't want to reveal, who knows what kind of past this guy has had, if it's him. I don't know if he's just not being open with them and that's why they're having issues believing him, or maybe because so many come forward and say it's them and they're being the Debbie Downers to not get the family's hopes up in case this isn't them. And then if it is, it is. And they're like, yay. And they don't want, I'm sure they're not like, oh, we think this is the guy. And then the parents, rely on the police to be the ones to kind of lead forward. So maybe they're just being extra careful and safe until the results come back. I don't really know why, but it seems like that's probably part of it.
Yeah, I guess that's their job, right? To just sort of keep everybody safe and make sure that they don't get too abused until they know for sure.
Yeah, they've watched this family go through hell for 32 years, so they're probably just being very, very cautious about their feelings, personal feelings, until they get results. But when you look at the pictures, it certainly does. Like he's got a school picture of him as a kid, and then there's a picture of what the little boy would have looked like as a little kid, and those are very close. And then they did a sketch of what he would look like as a teenager or a young adult. And again, you have a picture of him right next to it, and they look very similar. So I would, if I was this family, I would definitely have my hopes up. He does look like that, the baby, but you can't, I guess you can't it says law enforcement won't reveal why they're not as hopeful as the family, which had the father and mother take heritage tests to determine their background and possibly help identify any relation between those who come forward.
Yeah, and I wonder, not to throw shade, I wonder if maybe this guy has a record or something in his past. So
it says, unfortunately, at this time, it does not appear this will be credible information. However, we are working to confirm. I don't know. Interesting. When I read it, I was just, that really made me like, what? Why? Like, what? I wish they were being a little more open about it, but the family had been convinced they found Christopher 3 times in the past. Those were the other 3 times they did the DNA test. So anyway, I'm sure they're trying to avoid disappointment.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll be able to follow up on that. Now, to dive in to some 1982 cheese. We're going to be doing a review of Creepshow 1982. Creepshow is an anthology which tells 5 terrifying tales based on the EC horror comic books of the 1950s. Creepshow was directed by George Romero, and it was written by Stephen King. So we're going to start off with the prologue, and then basically as the movie progresses, each different story, of course, has its own title. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a brief summary of each one of those, and then we're going to talk about the things that we liked about it and the things that might have hit or missed for us. But I think at the least this will be pretty fun. So let's talk about the prologue. And Moni, this was the first time that you'd ever seen this, right?
Yeah, it was my very first time. I was de-virginized to the Creepshow.
Okay, so we're going to start off with the prologue here. So a young boy named Billy, he's getting yelled out by his father, and then his father totally mollywops him in the face for reading a horror comic book title, Creepshow. I mean, it was,
these 80 parents, man, they're just dicks.
Yeah, that was just really, off the hook. You would never see anything of that like that today. But Stan ends up talking to his wife, and he was basically saying he didn't want their son to be reading such crap. Now, I really wish he would have gotten more into why he thought what he was reading was crap, and especially after he slapped his son like that. But Billy sits upstairs basically cursing his father, as we've all done after we've gotten a whooping. And he hopes his dad rots in hell, and he hears a sound at the window, and he turns around and he sees this ghostly apparition in the form of the creep, which is on the cover of the comic book, and it's beckoning him to come closer. And then after that, we get the title of Creepshow. And we go into our very first story. The first story is called Father's Day. So in this story, It was actually an original story that was written by King specifically for this film. So Nathan Grantham, he's this old patriarch of this family who made a fortune off of bootlegging, extortion, murder for hire, all types of things like that. And he ends up being killed on Father's Day by his long-suffering daughter. His daughter was pretty much already unstable because she spent a lifetime putting up with her father's demands and emotional abuse, which for the most part culminated when he orchestrated the murder of this man that she was in love with named Peter. So we start off in 1979 when the remainder of Nathan's descendants, including Nathan's granddaughter Sylvia, his great-grandchildren, Richard and Cass has a husband named Hank. They get together for their annual Father's Day dinner. So Bedelia, she usually arrives a lot later than others, and that's just kind of the thing. People know that she's going to show up late. But one of the reasons why she's always late is, one, she's a drunk and she tends to stop at the cemetery that's right outside the family's house, and she lays a flower at the gravesite. So she's reminiscing about how she murdered her insufferable, overbearing father. So she accidentally spills her whiskey on the headstone, and it has this reanimating effect, and the remains start stirring. And of course, Nathan, his putrefied body, comes out of the ground, and he basically is talking about he wanted the cake that he never got. One of the things that they show you when you're watching it is it shows clips of him yelling at her, and he's always banging on the table like a child that's mad, saying, "Where's his cake?" And I can't really describe this from reading the synopsis, but it's even annoying to you.
Oh man, yeah.
Yeah, it really makes your skin crawl.
Where's my cake, Bedelia?
I can't again, my God.
And he's banging his cane on his chair and screaming, and it's Father's Day. See, I can do it. I can annoy y'all. You know that. See,
I know, but I would hope that you couldn't annoy me enough to just kill you. But then again, if I murdered your husband, you might end up going there, Mm-hmm. But the Revenant pretty much just comes out of the grave, and it gets her. So basically, he slowly avenges himself and everybody else who's at the house to celebrate that Father's Day. He kills them off one by one. Basically, one of the grandchildren's husband. There's like a headstone in the graveyard that magically slams down on him.
That was Ed Harris. He went out like a punk.
That's right.
Yeah, screamed like a little bitch too.
And in black. Yeah, absolutely. And my whole thing is, and I know that y'all probably thought the same thing. Now, if you've got this undead thing at the base of your feet, and then you have this huge headstone that's about to fall on you, I think I'm probably going to take chances fighting the dead thing instead of just...
He just laid there. Yeah. I'm like, dude, get up. Get up.
No, I don't know. Maybe, did y'all get any type of vibe that maybe... Because, there has to be kind of a supernatural element to it for it to be able to move the headstone. So you think maybe that it had him where he couldn't get up, or...
Maybe.
or
I don't know. He's Ed Harris, man. He should have fought it.
But he totally went out just really
freaking
weak.
Like a girl. Yeah.
It was a trip, but it was kind of funny as well.
Oh, he's new money. He's soft. That new money.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we get a scene after that happened where essentially this one ends up with him holding his granddaughter's head on a cake, showing it to his grandchildren, Richard and Cass. And I really love how, when they're screaming, you get like the comic book panel type, effects going on. I thought that was really dope, but it's left ambiguous at whether or not those two died. But, in my mind, I just think that moment is just frozen in time forever. And that's probably their torment. But at the same time, why is he beefing with the the great grandchildren though?
He's
they don't...
a dick, man. I don't know. I think he's just a bad guy.
Yeah, I don't really get that. But when you first watched the very beginning of this, and that you have more stories to come, Oni. Did this set a tone, or did you kind of roll your eyes and figure that that's exactly what you're going to get from beginning to end of this movie?
Oh, I seriously, sorry. I thought I was going to hate it because that was fun, but it was like, there's nothing scary about this. The effects don't really hold up that well. So I was pleasantly surprised as we got deeper into the whole thing, about how much I liked the rest. But yeah, this one was fun, but it was still just like, oh my God, there's 2 more hours of this left. Like, do I really have to watch all this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hate to say this, but because I don't know what y'all's feelings, but Creepshow is by far one of my favorite 80s horror movies. I like Return of the Living Dead. It's very nostalgic for me, but Creepshow to me, I probably watched Creepshow 50 times when I was a kid. No joke. I absolutely love it. And it literally probably helped catapult this one, and Cat's Eye did it for me as a kid. Like, I just freaking loved both those so much. And I guess probably as a kid, I needed the short stories to keep my attention going, but I absolutely adore Creepshow. I do. I wanted to watch it again once it was over. Like, so I guess you guys know my rating, but I love it.
Okay. Well, that's what I mean. I think that, it's a way to kind of ease you into the things that you're going to get a little bit later. So let's dive into the second one. The second one is titled The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, and it's based off of a short story that King had wrote, and he is actually played by Stephen King himself in the movie. So
great.
So Jordy Verrill is a backwoods guy, and he thinks that a newly discovered meteorite, which landed on his property, will provide enough money from the local college to pay off his $200 bank loan. So the meteorite's a little bit too hot for him to touch. He throws some water on it, and when he does that, it causes it to crack open and spew like this glowing blue stuff everywhere. It comes into contact with his skin. So eventually he finds himself being overcome by a rapidly spreading plant-like organism that's growing, all over his body. So as the weeds start to grow on the house and everything that Jordy has touched, he ends up pouring himself a bottle of vodka. So he falls asleep. He wakes up a little bit later. Like any of us, we're like, oh, was that a dream? And of course, he finds out that it was not a dream. And he has now grown a total beard of weeds. And he ends up taking a bath, and he's cautioned by the ghost of his father that the parasite wants water and, for him not to get in the tub. So he starts itching from the growth. It becomes unbearable, and he just jumps in the bath water. And the next morning, Jordy and his farm have been completely covered with dense layers of this alien vegetation. So in despair, he reaches for a shotgun and, blows his head off, killing himself. And then you hear a radio forecast announcing that heavy rains are predicted, and you're kind of left to think that this is going to spread all around. So I have to ask y'all, like, Stephen King is just so extra in his caricature of what a backwoods yokel would be. It's almost like you can take a caricature of any type of crazy stereotype of people who live out in the country, and it's like a caricature of your caricature. It's so over the top. So
I don't know. I think he was pretty spot on.
But and then I didn't even realize that Stephen King he must have had like some teeth. I didn't know he was that bucktooth. Yeah. I was like, unless that was something that he snapped in his mouth or whatever. But they did the all over the top buck teeth, overalls, blah blah blah. But this one was a very short one, and it's actually kind of sad because it's almost one of those things where it's just, the guy, like most people when they die, like lots of times when you die, you're not necessarily surrounded by people who love you. Sometimes you're alone, you know what I mean? Yep. And this is just one of those pitiful things where this guy, he gets a little curious. He wants to get out of debt, but yeah, he dies, and, apparently everywhere else is going to be infected. But did this one work for either of you, or did you feel like this one was more of a throwaway?
I mean, I love it. I think when I was a kid, it was one of my favorites just because I thought I really liked the meteor concept. and then, you know, watching him slowly get covered with green moss or whatever the hell that was just, and Stephen King made it funny. It was a very morbid tale, but I remember, and I was still laughing, you know, when I watched it a couple of days ago. Just like you said, he's very over the top, and he just, the way his reactions to everything are really funny. And so it's kind of like, he shoots himself in the head, and you're like, aw, but you're still kind of like, it's all just, it's lighthearted in a weird way. I don't know how to explain it.
Well, and I wanted to bring this up. Stephen King, IMDb has some really cool facts about, I mean, I know they do it for everything, but they have trivia for this particular film, and some of them are really interesting. One of the ones, to backtrack just a little bit, was the intro, the little boy in the intro. I remember last week we talked about Joe Hill, who is a best-selling author in his own right, and he's Stephen King's son. That was Joe Hill. So
That's awesome.
It was kind of impromptu where they threw him in to be the kid at the beginning and end of this movie. And then as far as Stephen King, I don't know, it's kind of throwaway, but I liked his performance. I thought he was funny. And apparently he had an allergic reaction to the makeup that he had to wear for that transformation. And so he had to get shots and all kinds of like steroids and medications so that the work would be, quote, bearable. So he definitely had a taste of acting. Maybe that's why he hasn't done it too often after that. But he did the work for that role, for sure.
And it says that during the break in filming, Stephen King took his son to McDonald's, and as a joke, Joe was made up with the bruises, cuts, and scabs. The girl at the drive-thru window called the police when she saw him.
Now, I didn't think it was a throwaway. I personally did like it. I like all of these. I thought that this one was just kind of the saddest, because like this guy is gone. He's pretty much probably just turned into moss, and nobody's ever gonna know. But I mean, he's probably so isolated that nobody really knew him anyway. But I thought that it was kind of a sad tale. Our next one is called Something That Tides You Over. One of my favorites.
My favorite,
Leslie Nielsen is in it. He plays
Ted
a character,
Danson.
Richard Vickers. Oh, yeah. Ted Danson, Galen Ross, and Richard Gere is actually, gets a credit for being in the background, talking in the background of this news broadcast. So
who was it?
Richard Gere.
Richard Gere.
No shit. Okay.
Yeah. And okay, so Something to Tide You Over. So Richard Vickers, he's this wealthy psychopath. He believes his cold-blooded. He bellies his cold-blooded murderousness. He stages this terrible fate for his unfaithful wife, Becky, and her lover, Harry Wentworth. He basically lures them out separately to his secluded beach property, and then at gunpoint bears them up to their necks below the high tide line. He explains to both of them that they have a chance of survival if they can hold their breath long enough for the sand to loosen once the seawater covers them, and they could break free and escape. Now, mind you, neither of these characters, he's basically telling them this separately, but we get to actually hear him tell it to Harry Wentworth, who's played by Ted Danson. Now, number one, if you're fully clothed and buried up to your neck in the sand, I think that there's no way that you can get out. I think it would be hard to get out if you were naked. But would you just have to take the bullet, or would you be willing to take your chances of this horrible death if you didn't manage to escape? I mean, would either of you have just said you would have opted for the sand trap?
Bullet. 150%. And I've always promised myself one thing, that I wouldn't die on my knees, basically just give up. And it's basically like, let him shoot you and play dead, and then maybe you can get away with that. Like this story, one of the reasons why it was one of my favorites was because it genuinely freaked me out. Like, I can't imagine. I was trying to actually sit and imagine a worse death than what he had for these two. Yeah. And I could not come up, because they had the element also, like, you're dying slowly, you're terrified, blah, blah, blah. But also you're getting to see someone you love die equally as slowly and in a terrifying manner. Like, it's awful all the way around. And it made it really interesting to watch, very uncomfortable in a good, scary way.
Well, it's the fact that you have to watch the person that you love die via closed circuit TV, because, as I mentioned earlier, they weren't necessarily side by side. They were watching each other. And then it's pretty messed up. The fact that, he's so happy that he goes to his house and, he's of course watching this on closed circuit TV. But what ends up happening to this douchebag, because this was my favorite story as well. But, of course, some time goes by. The two lovers that he murdered, they pretty much return as revenants. They're all waterlogged. And it's kind of interesting because there's no way that they would look like that, that quickly.
Right, yeah.
They really looked like they were rotted and, they were covered with seaweed. He ends up, of course, being scared shitless. He's like trying to shoot them and they remind him, you can't shoot us dead. Richard, we're already dead. And they keep repeating this. So the final scene ends up revealing that Richard is the one that's now buried in the beach facing the tide. And you can see two sets of footprints kind of disappearing into the surf. So while the tide is rising, this is the best part. He's like laughing hysterically. That he's totally gone crazy and he's just screaming over and over, I can hold my breath for a long time. Then we get another one of those cool comic backdrops where the frame freezes into an animation. And then you end up seeing the flipping comic pages again that go to the next story. So what was it? Christy, go ahead, dive in.
I was like, that my favorite part about that is when they're repeating what he said to them. You can hold your breath. If you can hold your breath. And they're like, and he's freaking out, when they found him when they got him in the bathroom. I love that part where Ted Danson's like, and then she parrots what Ted Danson's saying at the same time. And so it's just so, I remember as a kid, that freaking me the fuck out. Like this time my brain, it's amazing what your head thinks when you're older, but I was like you, Yardley, there's no way they would look like that after like an hour, of being in the ocean. Yeah. But as a kid, you don't care. They look creepy as hell in the 80s. That was pretty damn good makeup, So I remember them saying that even before I watched this movie, and then this one came on, and when I was a kid, this was my favorite one. It's changed now to a different one, which we'll reveal in a little while, but this was my favorite one because of the way he was talking and repeating what Leslie Nielsen had said to him when he was being buried, and so it was just so freaking creepy.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I really did like the makeup that they used. Yeah. And you know what? Now that I think about it, now that one isn't my favorite one. I think my favorite one was the last one, but we'll get into that one. Now, the next one is called The Crate.
That's my favorite right there, The Crate. I love it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This one is a good one though, because I think for me, this was one of the best ones, just mainly because you had characters that were a little bit more animated than in the other ones. But this one essentially is about a college janitor. A janitor, his name is Mike. He drops a quarter and finds his storage crate marked Arctic Expedition June 19th, 1834 is hidden up under this staircase. And he notifies this guy named Dexter, who's a college professor, that he found it. So the two decide to open up the crate and it's found to contain like a multi-fanged ape-like creature, and despite its short size, it's actually probably you'd say it was probably the height of Peter Dinklage, huh? Like it.
Yeah, it's small, but it's a lot wider.
Yeah, but it's like a real thick a muscle thug basically with a lot of hair. But it ends up grabbing Mike and killing him, which is actually one of the best parts of how Mike gets pulled up in the crate and gets bitten. So the only thing that's left of Mike as Dexter watches in horror is his boot. So not Mike, Stanley. So he runs in horror and he ends up finding a graduate student who happens to be, why in the hell is a graduate student? I don't even know what time it is.
They were talking about it earlier at the party that this guy was still at the school and he's going to win like a Nobel Peace Prize by the time he's 20 because he's so like dedicated and everything. That's the same dude that they were talking about.
So that's Charlie. Okay.
Not
so
winning one now.
So he ends up running into Charlie. Charlie, of course, is skeptical, and they go to investigate. And somehow the crate has been moved back under the stairs. Charlie's ended up being killed by the creature. And that's one of the most funniest parts, is just, him grabbing a flashlight and not really believing it, and then getting some clues and getting curious. And of course, this is a smart guy, so I'm pretty sure that being curious is in his DNA. But he ends up getting killed as he examines the crate. So Stanley hauls ass out of there. He wants to inform his friend at the university, another professor named Henry Northrop. So at this point, Stanley's all traumatized, hysterical, and he's talking to Northrop about the deadly monster, and talking about how they have to dispose of it. Northrop essentially sees his creature as a way to rid himself of his out of control, off the hook, and I love her.
I love her. You know what? That's probably me. That's why I love her.
You know what, Chris? It's funny. Like, I was actually watching this again yesterday, and I was like, that's Christy.
Totally. Anyway. When I drink, I'm not like verbally abusive, but I'm loud as hell when I drink. And, not like the mean part, but I can just see Rick taking me to parties and me being loud and obnoxious drunk, And I'm like, hey, you signed up for this, buddy. But I'm not like mean about it. I just got tickled at that could easily be me, and just the funny part about him always dreaming about killing her, and it's just hysterical.
Yeah, but I mean, if I saw this creature, and I know that this creature is eating two people, for me, even if I didn't like my wife and I'm trying to figure out a way to get out of it, I'm not gonna think, you know what, I know that there's a monster that's the size of Peter Dinklage, that's eating grown people whole. Let me get my wife to come down here.
Well, it's hysterical. That's the first thing he thinks of. His friend comes to the door and is like, he's killed two people and it's a monster and it's from 18-something Arctic. And he's thinking, excellent. Perfect way to kill my wife.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what'd you think about that, Moni? Well, what did you think about Wilma as a character?
I hated her. And one of the things that I like about the whole movie is that they don't pull their punches with violence, which I kind of wasn't expecting that. And so you see the part where she's leaning against a tree and she's talking shit to him and he just pulls out a gun and shoots her. And I didn't realize that wasn't real for a second. And it's so gory. And then everybody's clapping for him. And I was like, yeah, I'd be clapping too. She's a bitch. Pretty entertaining stuff for reals. And I think it would have been fun as an actress to play her. Can you imagine just pretending to be that awful for a couple days? That would be fun.
Well, she's the same actress from Swamp Thing, which another one of my faves when I was a kid from the 80s. I don't know if did you ever watch Swamp Thing, Yardley?
Yeah, Swamp Thing, and she's also in Cannonball Run.
She's the main actress. Yeah, she's the main actress in Swamp Thing. So it was just she was a really sweet lady, and the love interest of the Swamp Thing in Swamp Thing. So it's just funny to see her playing such a bitch,
Yeah. Well, her name is Adrienne Barbeau, and she was in Swamp Thing, but she was in Cannonball Run. She was one of the two women driving the car, and that was their thing to help them to win the race, was having her boobs out and stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So she's been doing it. She's been doing it for a while, but yeah, well, anyway, to say the least, Wilma is pretty interesting. So her husband ends up leaving her a note at the house and ends up actually luring her, out there. And, the plan ends up working. She ends up getting eaten and mauled to death by the monster. And then he ends up somehow getting a lock back on the box and securing it. He puts it in the back seat of his truck and he pushes it off of this I don't know. It was this cliff that goes into the ocean. So we see the crate hit the ground and he's assuming that the monster is dead. And then of course we see the crate crack open and then it goes to the comic book backdrop again. And we see that obviously that this thing can breathe underwater. And I guess as a viewer, we're to assume that this thing somehow gets out and wreaks havoc. But but I mean, a lot of these stories are really quick and to the point, but I think that the highlight is definitely the interaction between Wilma and Northrop. And as Moni had said, we get to see in this one, pretty much throughout the whole thing, he's just thinking about killing her because she's so, she's
awful.
So annoying.
Yeah.
And you would never get that today where, I mean, just the way that she's a very abusive person too. So I'm pretty sure with him having to put up with that all the time, it's taking his toll, like the daughter in the very first one. But yeah, they didn't really pull any punches, and I totally dug her. I would watch a movie with just her and him. And her pissing him off, for 2 straight hours. But
they're like the Odd Couple, violent style.
Yeah, like a cartoon or something.
Yeah.
Well, Chrissy, so for the most part, is what made this one your favorite, just mainly because of Wilma and her interaction throughout this, or was there something else that?
I really like the monster. He almost has like a personality. He's just kind of like, you almost feel sorry for him because he's dangerous and he eats people, but and then he goes and hides in his little, under the stairs. He didn't ask for any of this. He got taken out of his home, 200 years ago. And he just was, I almost felt sorry for him. And, you have more, you get to see him more than a lot of the characters. So he almost even has a little of a character development. And then I think him and his wife are just hysterical together. And the concept, and now that I'm older and I'm married, I've been through all the crazy bullshit. It's just hysterical to see such a extreme version of so many marriages, and you've been to those parties and you've seen that dynamic before with the overbearing wife and the guy's kind of real quiet and sniveling, and she's drunk, and that's not me, but the drunk loud part is me, but I'm not overbearing or control my husband in any way. He'd put his thing down and be like, oh hell no, but I just thought the dynamic was so over the top, and I've been to so many company parties where you've seen this dynamic, and so it just tickled me to see him, visioning himself killing her over and over again, and then actually does it in the most crazy way. I just thought it was, I love it, and I love the monster. I think he was fake but scary at the same time. I mean, those teeth, I can't imagine that being the last thing I see before I get eaten.
Yeah,
I like his eyes. I think he's completely animatronic if you read about him, and he's kind of cute, but they make him look I mean, he's scary with those teeth, but then those eyes are sort of like cartoonish or something. And I don't know, they really bring him to life with being completely animatronic. I think they did a really good job just making those eyes like super animated. I remember I was watching a reality show. God, I forget what it's called right now, but it's Jim Henson's Creature Shop. And they actually work in Jim Henson's shop for a chance to be hired by the company. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I remember them talking about the construction of these puppets and these animatronic, you know, creatures, and talking about how the eyes are like the main thing that you have to focus on. No matter how everything else moves, no matter how everything else looks, it's the eyes that are the first way to make people believe that this creature could actually be alive or existing in our world. So I thought they did a really cool job when you see his little eyes peek out before you see those teeth and everything.
Yeah. And that's why his eyes make him, that's kind of like the part of it that makes him look like kind of sad and pathetic, because his eyes aren't as scary as the rest of him. When you first see his eyes, I mean, yeah, it's alarming, but his eyes almost look sad. And so for some reason, I felt sorry for the guy. And I just think that it was the deaths of the people were funny. I just didn't feel bad for any of them for some reason. I'm like, poor guy's hungry. He hasn't eaten in 150 years, you know.
That's what I was about to say. He hasn't eaten since like 1834. Now, well, I think the one that I think is, I would say if there was a 1A and 1B, they're creeping on you. This is one of my favorites. It's pretty short. It's probably maybe the second shortest one of this series. But Upson Pratt, he's this ruthless businessman. He has mysophobia, which is a pathological fear of contamination and germs. He's essentially living in a hermetically sealed apartment that's completely controlled with electronic locks and all of these surveillance cameras. So during a particularly severe lightning storm, he finds himself looking out over the concrete of New York City, and there's a rolling blackout that's heading his way. So when it hits his apartment tower, this is when things get pretty interesting for Mr. Pratt, who finds himself helpless. And when his flat becomes overrun by hordes of roaches, this situation, it rapidly becomes just, very dire. So he ends up locking himself in a panic room, and then he ends up finding the cockroaches have already infested the room that he's locked himself in. So there's no way to escape. He ends up being swarmed by roaches. He ends up having a heart attack. And when the electricity comes back on in the building, his corpse is shown in the panic room, and it's devoid of roaches, and then his body starts to contort, and all of a sudden, all of these roaches start bursting out of his mouth and his nose and just totally enveloping the panic room. Now, during this whole sequence of events, leading up to the roaches killing him, like, this guy, he's probably the biggest douchebag that we've seen in this whole series, because his whole thing was, he makes these impossible demands and threatens to fire people. And one of the things that was shown in this one is that apparently he had fired this guy and he had went home and ended up killing himself. And I thought one of the best things about this is just the fact that this guy's wife was like calling and cursing him out because she pretty much blamed him for being the reason that her husband had committed suicide. But I have to say, in terms of a squirm factor, this whole episode gave you that 100%. And I don't know how either of you are, when it comes to seeing cockroaches or roaches in general, but I would have to admit I could totally see both of you totally tap dancing around the room just with no regard for anything going on. I mean, actually, I know we're all familiar with Raiders of the Lost Ark, and in that scene with all of the bugs that they had to walk through or whatever. This is kind of on that scale, but in a smaller room, which seems to make it even worse, because in Raiders, you just heard them crunching the bugs and they didn't really notice them until they put down the torch. On this, it's a whitest of the white. Everything is white because he's just really about germs. He wants to see any dirt or see anything, so everything's white. So these brown roaches you see very clearly. And this one kind of gets you. If you're watching this and a bug gets on your hand, you're probably going crazy.
Yeah. So if there's anything I love in real life, it's bugs. Like, that's like Christy's eyeball thing. Like, me and bugs. It's a true phobia, and we find roaches at work all the time, and I've threatened to burn the entire building down. So this one, the roaches, I was trying to be cool. I was like, okay, me personally, I would wish I was dead if I was stuck in all those roaches, but they don't actually bite, right? My husband's like, no, they don't bite. You'd survive. So I Googled it right now, and I want you to know. Cockroaches are omnivores that eat plants and meat. They've been recorded to eat human flesh of both the living and the dead, although they are more likely to take a bite of fingernails, eyelashes. Can you imagine a fucking roach on your eye? Feet and hands. The bites may cause irritation, lesions, and swelling. So cockroaches absolutely do fucking bite. And also pan in at the end, like you were saying, of all the roaches coming out of his body. And it's like, okay, gross, I get it. And then it like continues to like open the flesh and come out. Oh my God.
Oh, I gotta tell you really quick how I knew they fucking bite is because when I used to live in downtown Atlanta in Grant Park, when we first moved here, that's where we lived for 2 years. And a tropical depression was breezing through from Florida that was a hurricane. And we lost power, and my daughter was just a baby, and so I decided to grill her some hot dogs because we didn't have any power. And in the middle of a freaking, tropical depression storm, and I dropped one of the hot dogs on the ground, but I was getting poured on, and the wind was, slapping me in the face, and so I just left it on the patio and hightailed it inside once my hot dogs were done. And not an hour later, I turn on the porch light where the hot dog was, and all these cockroaches scattered, and half that hot dog had been eaten in just an hour. God. So, hell yeah, that's why when you said they don't bite, I'm like, oh, they bite.
I mean, yeah, those things are, they're a beast. And
I've seen the ones in California, girl. Those things are They're fucking enormous. Huge.
My first apartment that I ever lived in. Like, I moved out of my parents' house, moved into my first apartment, and we had this guy that lived underneath us. We lived on the second floor, and the guy that lived underneath us was this disgusting hoarder, and he had these vines that grew from his patio up into our balcony. And so the roaches used to climb his vines and go into our balcony. And then we had no air conditioning in California, so we would have the sliding glass door open a lot. And they would come up through there, so you'd be laying on the couch, and all of a sudden you'd have a cockroach on your face.
Oh,
we kept that place so clean.
God,
and then you'd go to the association, and then they'd be like, "Oh, they're water bugs, and you just have to cover your
palmetto bugs is what they call them."
Cover our drains with cups, and we would still catch cockroaches coming out of the drains. And in the meantime, I went there with a live cockroach in one of these cups, and I was like, I don't fucking care what you call these. You can call them water bugs, you can call it butthole bugs, but these things are gross, and you guys need to spray for them. So yeah, I've had way too many, and now we're like too many cockroaches in my life. 100%.
Nasty.
Yeah, they are. They're annoying. I mean, no doubt about that. I don't know. I'm probably more freaked out about the smaller ones because there's always more smaller ones than cockroaches. Because I mean, Chrissy knows down here. I mean, you have all of these bark. They're all over. And you know where I live, on the corner, there's a sewer drainage thing, and then everybody has to have their garbage cans pushed out to the street. And you know what that is? That's just a breeding ground for roaches and things. Because like everybody, over here in the, in the tech area or whatever, if you've got like all of these houses and everybody has their trash out, so you're asking for trouble. And this year it's been super hot, and so all of the conditions that would make it right for that. So I can't stand them, but for me, the smaller ones are just more. I mean, I used to actually just I have this pack of throwing knives, and every now and then we get these big. A cockroach would be in the house, and I would like use a throwing knife to try to hit them. And I actually, I've done that 5 times, and I hit 2. So I think that's a pretty good, that's a pretty good percentage. But this one, this one kind of.
Oh, I have another roach story real quick. So I was on maternity leave, came back to work after 3 months, had a mug that had like a lid that had like a little hole for drinking out of, obviously. Oh. And I went to check and see if the mug was clean because I wanted to put some tea in it. And I had, taken the lid off like a normal person does and turned it over so I could look inside the cup. And I felt something on my hand and turned my hand over. This motherfucker had been living in this mug who knows how many weeks. And he hissed at me. Oh, and he was the size of the entire palm of my hand. And I flung him. And luckily, my coworker at the time killed it for us. He managed to track it down. But that thing was living in a clean mug for who knows how many weeks, and then hisses at me for disturbing his slumber there.
Oh, yeah.
Cockroaches. They're going to inherit the earth.
That's what I was getting ready to say. They're going to outlive us all. I can tell you that right now.
Maybe he was trying to make a nest in there. I think, and before we move on to the epilogue, my last cockroach story, it's pretty gross, but like cockroaches are attracted to things like coffee and sodas and things like that. And I remember I went to this party, and there was like sodas and stuff all around. And one of my friends, there was like this open, what was that thing called? It's called Surge. I think that was the name of the thing or whatever. Yeah. In the green can.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess he picked it up. He was like, "Oh yeah, this is my can from like it's like the night before," and he took a sip out of it. Oh, no. And apparently a cockroach had gotten in there and into the can, couldn't climb out, and then it actually had swollen up. A little bit fatter because it was, in the thing. He takes this big gulp, and then I see him like spit that fat, juicy, bloated cockroach out, and I almost hit the floor. It was hilarious, but I never knew that a cockroach could absorb so much fluid.
Oh, God, I'm going to puke.
Yeah, and it just slapped, like when he spit it out, it just thudded against the ground.
Oh, God.
And of course, it was pretty horrible. But yeah, those things, just like you said, Christy, it doesn't take long for those things to find something to eat or to get into. So, yeah.
So
Well, anyway, so that sucked for them, but it definitely was a laugh for me and my cousin. Uh, so let's go to the epilogue. So the epilogue kind of follows up on what happened in the prologue. You know, the following morning, we see two garbage collectors find the Creepshow comic book that Billy's dad smacked them for and threw out. So they find it in the trash. And they look at the ads in the book for X-ray specs and Charles Atlas bodybuilding course, and they see an advertisement for a voodoo doll, and they're like, "Hey, you know what? We could get that, but it's already been clipped and redeemed." And then we go back to the house, and Stan, which is Billy's father, he complains of neck pain, and it keeps on escalating, and then it eventually becomes deadly. And then we go upstairs and we see Billy repeatedly and gleefully jabbing the voodoo doll as he finally gets his revenge on his father for his past abuse. So bravo for Billy for becoming a murderer. um, but after you see the way that he's treated at the beginning, you're like, okay, that there's a little bit of retribution, but that's how that's how it closes out. So we had five pretty good stories. And before we give our ratings, I just want to ask both of you, what are your favorite ones, and just give us a star rating out of 5.
Go for it, Moni.
I would say Father's Day and Tide You Over were probably my favorite stories. And Tide You Over was the most legitimately, like, psychologically scary to me all the way through. They're creeping up on you. Obviously, we just talked about the bugs, so pass on the cockroaches. Anyway, out of 5, you say, I would give it a 4, maybe a 4.5. The time went by pretty quickly in a good way. Like, I was thinking, 2 hours of short stories is going to drag, but they don't drag at all. And so I enjoyed it. It was a nice Friday night evening to spend watching this. And thank you, Yardley, for introducing me to something that I hadn't tried, because I'm happy to have watched it. I do have a question before Christy gives her rating. I have Creepshow 2 on DVD here from the library. Is it worth watching?
Yes, okay, it's literally almost as good as the first. In my opinion, I thought it was really good. What did you think, Yardley? Did you think Creepshow 2 was as good or almost as good?
I don't know if I would say that it's as good. I actually don't remember much about it, and that's why I don't think I believe that it's as good as the first one. Okay. Actually,
thanks for the ride, lady.
Yeah, that's right. That one was
ride,
in that
lady.
one, huh? You know
and
what?
then the oil spot. Remember the oil spot in the lake? The raft is what I think it's called.
That's right. I don't think it's as good as the first one, but I think it's up there actually. Now that because now I'm starting to remember when you said that.
Worth watching, basically. Okay.
Yeah.
I have it here for free, so I was curious about it. I also, just shameless plug for library, I have the actual comic book at the library, and I might read it and see how they compare.
Okay, well, that's what's up. Oh, something else. Well, this Creepshow comic book that the kid was reading, and they are in print. I was wondering, do y'all have that?
Yeah, that's the one. Mm-hmm. And it actually it's always checked out, so it's pretty popular. I might have to get a second one, but yeah, I want to read it now, because obviously written by Stephen King, it can't be terrible. So I'm kind of excited.
And the illustrations are, they're throwback illustrations. I really do like it. And actually, having watched this, I think I'm going to actually end up buying it. I need a physical copy of it. It's kind of like an oversized.
It is, yeah.
Thing, but it's pretty good. Well, I'm happy that you liked it. So, Christy, do you have a couple of favorites and you want to give a rating?
Again, I like the crate just out of just hystericalness as an adult. I think I liked it when I was a kid, but it really stands out to me now. I think just as somebody who's been there and seen those kinds of people, it cracks me up that could be their demise. But and then I'm deciding. I think probably for some reason I really liked Geordie's story with Stephen King. I just think it was clever and the way they did it. And then I always like the Armageddon, end of the world type stories. And this is basically kind of a prologue to a, end of the world type scenario. So I think those two were probably my favorites. I would definitely, give it a 4.25 or 4.5. Just a lot of that is nostalgia for me because I just loved this movie so much growing up. But honestly, watching it, you just don't get movies like this anymore. And I miss that because, you know, we get every once in a while, like Shaun of the Dead, Housebound, but nothing like this. And so I really did enjoy it, and I wish we could see more like that. Hopefully Creepshow, the show series, will take on some of these types of concepts and give us what we like. So
yeah, great. I'll probably give it. I'll give it a 4, and I could definitely, you know, I could easily go up to 4.5. I had mentioned earlier that Something Creeping on You with the Roaches was like my 1B, and my number 1 would probably have been Something That Tied You Over. But at the same time, the one with the roaches, it was just so short, so didn't have as much substance. So if I had to pick something that had more substance, like Something That Tied You Over, I'm definitely going to lean more towards The Crate, because like I said, you know, just Wilma, and they just don't really, you know what I mean? They just really don't care about showing violence in that one. I think is a great one. I, like you, Christy, grew up watching this. I always like, you know, I like a certain amount of cheese, but I think that they did things well. And I agree with you, Moni. Even though the movie was roughly 2 hours, right? It doesn't really seem that way because you have so many, you know, different stories that they're plowing through very efficiently. So yeah.
Question, Moni, what did your husband think of Creepshow?
Oh, he was rolling his eyes. He didn't really pay attention to it. I think that was part of why I was starting off biased. Was he was like, oh, geez, like, oh, effects didn't hold up. Oh, geez, like you'd really do that. And eventually I just got to ignoring him like a good spouse will do, and decided that I liked it on my own.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I could see him I don't think he really cares for the 80s cheese horror, you know.
No, not his favorite.
It's its own place. I like regular horror. I love paranormal, but the 80s cheese horror is just, of course, a part of us. Mardley and I grew up with it. Probably our first introductions into horror. Definitely a great way to get introduced to horror, because as a kid you're not like scared out of your mind. It's there's some funny and some silliness with it too, so you can, you know, ease yourself into the crazier stuff. But yeah, I definitely love me some 80s cheesy horror.
Yeah, well, okay, well, I'm glad that for pretty universal. It was, you know, I think we all can agree that at minimum, it was definitely enjoyable. And, you know, it definitely, you know, I actually, as things progress, you're like, okay, I can't wait to see what the next one is. You know, see. So hopefully the TV series is going to be on the streaming service will be comparable to the enjoyment that we got from these. And once again, I want to give credit to, thank God for friggin' the internet and Wikipedia, because you know, I know that I rely on them to, you know, to help to, you know, get the summaries of these things going, because I do not believe in double work or duplication of services. I can kind of wing some of the things that I found. So big ups to Wikipedia. And I think what we should do is go ahead and give our social media information, but as well, I just want to let everybody know, you know, we're on Podbean, we're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher as well, right?
Yeah, we're also on Google Play, I believe, or something like that, whatever that's called.
And you can find this podcast on Twitter at creepin_it. Also, we have a Facebook page, which we generally will put a lot of the articles that we have discussed on the podcast on the page as well as creepy things or just, you know, funny things that go on throughout the week. So just check us out on there. So Moni, how can people get you on social media?
I am Rebel Moni on Twitter and Moni Bear on Instagram. And yeah, so find me over there. And I'm, like you already mentioned, the Facebook page. I'm doing most of that. So there's been some pretty engaging things. I hope that y'all go over there and check it out, because there's been some pretty funny shit over there too lately. So
okay, well, Christy.
I am Creepin' Christy with a Kristi on Instagram, and then I do the Twitter, which haven't been doing much on Twitter, trying to get back into it. Work is absolutely crazy, so I'm making it a point to remember to do some fun tweeting, maybe copying Moni's posts off Facebook and putting them on the Twitter. But
Twitter
something
posts are super engaging though, so I love them when you're up there. So
thank you. I just wish that I could do more. But so creepin_it on Twitter.
Yep, you can follow me at militant_marker. I was kind of in the middle of drinking coffee, so let me say that again. You can follow me at militant_marker on Twitter. And you know what? Another great podcast in the books. I definitely love kind of going back and grabbing some of these old classics, and it's been fun. And actually, you know, I think we're getting around that time where Netflix is probably going to be dropping, you know, a lot more stuff, because I know that there are some shows that are about to get taken off. So we're going to have to check out and see what kind of horror they have coming up next.
Oh, I'm actually just about to post this on our Facebook page. The Haunting of Hill House. Not to get too into it, I know we're wrapping things up, but they are doing a 10-episode original series for Netflix exclusively. And I know I enjoyed the film, so this might be worth taking a look at for the cost of your already paid for Netflix.
Nice.
Okay. Well, that's what's up. So what do you got for us next week, Kristi?
So have both of you guys seen The Matrix, I'm assuming?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I figured. So I did actually look to see what movies were coming out and didn't really see anything. I don't think I looked too much, but kind of in like late last night was kind of looking for, oh yeah, it's my turn. So I decided to do something a little different. Have you ever heard of people say they had a glitch in the Matrix where it seems like something repeats itself, or you put something down one place but it disappears and ends up totally different spot, or something's frozen, almost looks like malfunctioning in normal day. Anyway, they're called glitches in the Matrix. Basically a play on the movie where it seems like we're all in like a computer simulation and things sometimes go haywire and people think that they viewed this with their own eyes. And so we're going to talk about that, talk about if we have ever had one, and then also read some stories from lots of people who say that they've experienced one.
Nice. Yeah, that's actually a really interesting topic. Thank you for coming up with that.
Yeah, agreed. Well, that'll be fun. And once again, thanks everybody who's tuned in and downloaded our podcast. And always know that you can reach out to us or DM us if you have a story or there's a story that you found that you might want to hear us discuss on the podcast. So with that being said, until next time, keep it real.
We've been trying for